Caligula, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, started his reign in 37 AD as perhaps the most eagerly welcomed emperor Rome had ever seen. The people adored him, the Senate praised him. After the paranoid cruelty of Tiberius, here was a young man of 25 who seemed to represent everything Rome had hoped for. That goodwill lasted less than a year. Shortly after taking power, Caligula fell into a severe illness, and when he recovered, something had fundamentally changed. He declared himself a living god, a genuine reorganization of how he expected to be treated, demanding priests, temples, and offerings in his name. He reportedly held conversations with the moon goddess, wandering palace corridors at night to speak with her. He ordered his soldiers during a military campaign in northern Europe to collect seashells from the beach as spoils of war against Neptune, the sea god, an act so bizarre his generals complied in stunned silence. His most famous story, appointing his horse Incitatus as a consul, is disputed by some historians, who argue it was a calculated insult to the Senate rather than genuine delusion. What is not disputed is the financial catastrophe of his reign. He inherited a treasury surplus that his predecessor had accumulated over years, and emptied it completely within 12 months, through spectacles, feasts, and reckless construction. He executed people on whims, humiliated senators by forcing them to run alongside his chariot, and by his own family's account committed acts too disturbing for even his contemporaries to record neutrally. His Praetorian Guard assassinated him in January of 41 AD, after just under 4 years in power, stabbing him more than 30 times in a palace corridor. He was 28 years old. Nero. Nero came to power in 54 AD at just 16 years old, and spent the early part of his reign governed by his mother Agrippina and his tutor Seneca. Once he removed them from the picture, Agrippina by assassination, Seneca by forced retirement, what remained was a man of enormous insecurity and genuinely disturbing impulses, dressed in imperial purple. His mother's murder alone required 3 attempts, the first of which involved a specially constructed collapsible boat designed to sink with her aboard. She swam to shore. He eventually sent assassins to finish the job. His pregnant wife Poppaea reportedly died after he kicked her in the stomach, though some historians consider the account exaggerated. He performed publicly as a singer and actor, which in Roman society was considered deeply shameful for a man of any status, and he forced audiences to sit through his performances under threat of punishment. People reportedly faked their own deaths to be carried out of the theater. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which burned for 6 days and destroyed vast portions of the city, suspicion fell on Nero, with many believing the fire was deliberately set to clear land for his Domus Aurea, a golden palace complex so enormous it was said to cover up to 300 acres of prime Roman real estate. In his final years, paranoia consumed him entirely. He executed senators, generals, and former allies on the faintest suspicion of disloyalty. When a revolt finally succeeded in 68 AD, he fled Rome and, finding himself abandoned, reportedly wept that the world was losing such a great artist before helping drive a blade into his own throat. He was 30 years old. Justin II. Justin II became Byzantine emperor in 565 AD, and for the first years of his reign was considered a capable, if unremarkable, ruler. Then, around 574 AD, following a series of catastrophic military defeats, he suffered a complete and public mental collapse. According to the historian John of Ephesus, who witnessed events firsthand, Justin began biting his attendants. He made animal noises in court. He had to be wheeled through the palace on a specially constructed movable throne. During his worst episodes, he would attempt to eat the people around him. The court, unable to hide what was happening, introduced continuous live music throughout the imperial chambers, one of the earliest recorded uses of music as a psychiatric intervention, and reported that it had some calming effect. Modern historians have speculated that what Justin experienced may have been a severe stroke, extreme depression, or acute psychosis, and that the military disasters of his reign may have been the triggering event for an underlying vulnerability. Whether the cause was neurological or psychological, the practical consequence was the same. He ceded power to his general Tiberius as co-emperor in 574 AD, and never meaningfully governed again. He died in 578 AD, having spent his final years as an imperial figurehead, kept largely out of public sight. Charles VI of France. Charles VI inherited the French throne in 1380 and reigned for 42 years. Though roughly half of that reign was conducted during periods of acute psychosis, so severe his courtiers weren't always sure which version of the king they were dealing with on any given morning. His first recorded episode came in 1392, during a military march, when a sudden loud noise caused him to draw his sword and attack his own knights, killing 4 of them before being physically restrained. The episodes that followed over the next 3 decades included one of history's most documented psychiatric phenomena, the glass delusion, in which Charles became convinced his body was made of glass and would shatter if touched. He refused physical contact entirely during these periods, reportedly having iron rods sewn into his clothing to prevent accidental breakage, and froze in terror if anyone moved toward him too quickly. Between episodes he could be entirely lucid, governing normally, and behaving by all accounts like a functional king, which made his condition all the more destabilizing. No one at court ever quite knew what they would find. His instability was ruthlessly exploited by rival noble factions, with the Burgundians and Armagnacs essentially using his incapacity as a power vacuum to wage a proxy civil war, contributing to the conditions that allowed Henry V of England to claim the French throne. Joanna of Castile. Joanna of Castile became Queen of Castile in 1504, and, in a just world, would be remembered as one of the most powerful women in early modern European history. Instead, she is remembered as Joanna the Mad, a label applied by the 2 men who imprisoned her. The obsession with her husband Philip I was real and alarming by any contemporary account. She reportedly refused to allow women near him, flew into rages at the sight of attractive ladies-in-waiting, and followed his movements with an intensity that unnerved the entire court. When Philip died suddenly in 1506 at just 28 years old, Joanna's grief crossed into territory that contemporary observers found deeply disturbing. She refused to allow his coffin to be sealed or buried for months, traveling with it across the Spanish countryside, and, according to multiple accounts, opening it at intervals to kiss his face and hands. What happened after is where history gets complicated. Her father Ferdinand II had her declared incompetent and locked away at Tordesillas Castle in 1509. Her son Charles I, who would become Holy Roman Emperor, continued the imprisonment for the rest of her life. She remained technically queen for 50 years while never once being permitted to govern. Modern historians are genuinely divided on whether she was mentally ill or politically eliminated. The accounts of her madness come almost exclusively from the men who benefited from her removal. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV of Russia, the first man to hold the title of Tsar of all Russia, was not always terrible. His early reign showed genuine administrative talent. He reformed the legal code, expanded trade, and pushed back Russia's borders. The transformation accelerated in 1560 with the death of his first wife Anastasia, which Ivan became convinced was a poisoning orchestrated by the boyar nobility around him. Modern forensic analysis has lent this strange credibility, as high levels of mercury and arsenic were found in her remains. In 1565, he created the Oprichnina, a personal secret police force of several thousand men who dressed entirely in black, rode black horses, and carried dog heads and brooms attached to their saddles to symbolize that they would sniff out and sweep away treason. What they actually did was massacre entire towns on Ivan's orders. His psychological deterioration reached its most devastating moment in November 1581, when during an argument he struck his own son and heir, also named Ivan, with an iron-tipped staff, killing him. The famous painting by Ilya Repin depicting Ivan holding his dying son captures something contemporaries described accurately. Ivan never recovered from it psychologically, spending his remaining years swinging between violent rages and extreme religious guilt, alternating mass executions with days of fasting, weeping prayer, and self-flagellation. Rudolph II. Rudolph II became Holy Roman Emperor in 1576, and almost immediately began withdrawing from the actual business of ruling. He moved his court from Vienna to Prague, filling Prague Castle with alchemists, astrologers, painters, sculptors, clockmakers, and occult scholars. Rudolph suffered severe depressive episodes throughout his reign. Modern historians broadly agree this was likely what we would today call bipolar disorder, and during his lowest periods he could be unreachable for weeks, refusing audiences, ignoring correspondence, and leaving the empire to manage itself. His court became one of the most intellectually extraordinary in European history almost by accident. Tycho Brahe worked there, Johannes Kepler served as his court astronomer from 1601 onward, and the art he collected became foundational to several major European museums. Rudolf himself spent enormous resources on attempts to transmute base metals into gold. By the early 1600s, the Holy Roman Empire had drifted into near-total administrative paralysis, with religious conflicts escalating and territorial disputes going unresolved. His brother Matthias staged a formal coup against him in 1608, stripping him of authority over most of the Habsburg territories. Rudolf died in 1612, having accomplished very little politically, but having inadvertently made Prague one of the great centers of Renaissance thought. Christian VII of Denmark. Christian VII became King of Denmark and Norway in 1766, at the age of 17, and was, by nearly every contemporary account, already showing serious signs of mental illness before he ever sat on the throne. His symptoms included extreme mood swings, episodes of self-harm, dissociation from reality, and a compulsive need to slap visiting dignitaries. He would roll on the floor during state functions, wander palace corridors at night making strange noises, and during his lucid periods display a childlike passivity that made him easy to manipulate. The manipulation came swiftly and dramatically in the form of his personal physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee, who rose from royal doctor to the most powerful man in Denmark in the space of 2 years, issuing over 1,000 royal decrees in Christian's name, and effectively running the country, while the king nodded along. Struensee was arrested in 1772, tried for treason and adultery, and executed, his body publicly dismembered. Christian reigned as a nominal figurehead for another 36 years, kept presentable for official functions while real power passed between regents and council members. He died in 1808, having been king for over 40 years, without meaningfully governing for a single one of them. George III of Britain. George III ruled Britain for 60 years, oversaw the loss of the American colonies and the early years of the Napoleonic Wars, and is remembered by most of the world primarily for going mad. His episodes of acute mental illness, at least 4 major ones over the course of his reign, were characterized by incoherent rambling at unstoppable speed for hours, extreme physical agitation, and in the later episodes, full hallucinations. His urine turned a distinctive purple color during episodes, fueling the modern theory that he suffered from porphyria, a metabolic disorder that causes severe neurological and psychiatric symptoms. The porphyria theory was proposed in 1969 and has been both widely accepted and substantially challenged since. Some historians argue the evidence better fits bipolar disorder or another psychiatric condition. What is not disputed is how he was treated. Doctors of the era responded to his episodes with straitjackets, restraint chairs, cold baths, and a treatment philosophy that amounted to yelling authority at the king until he calmed down. His final episode began in 1810 and never lifted. The Regency Act of 1811 handed power to his son, the future George IV, while George III spent his last decade at Windsor Castle, blind, deaf, bearded, and entirely lost to reality, dying in 1820 at the age of 81. Ludwig II of Bavaria. Ludwig II became King of Bavaria in 1864, at 18 years old, and for a brief period engaged with politics well enough that no one anticipated what was coming. What was coming was Neuschwanstein. Beginning in 1869, Ludwig began pouring the Bavarian royal treasury into a series of fantasy castles built in the Alpine wilderness, each one more elaborate than the last. He dined alone at a table set for imaginary guests, held conversations with historical figures he believed to be present in the room, and in his later years stopped attending government functions entirely, communicating with ministers only through written notes passed through intermediaries. He rode through mountain snowfields at midnight in a gilded sleigh lit by torchlight, slept through the day, and conducted what remained of his royal business in the small hours of the morning. In June 1886, a panel of psychiatrists declared him insane without ever conducting a personal examination. He was deposed and taken to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg. The following evening, June the 13th of 1886, he went for a walk with his psychiatrist along the lake shore, and both men were found dead in the water hours later. The lake was waist deep. The official cause of death was drowning, but whether it was suicide, murder, or accident has never been conclusively established. Otto of Bavaria. Otto of Bavaria was Ludwig II's younger brother and became King of Bavaria in 1886, without anyone seriously pretending he would ever actually rule. Otto had been showing severe symptoms of mental illness since his mid-20s, long before he became king, with accounts describing him crawling on all fours, screaming uncontrollably during church services, and behaving in ways that made it impossible to present him in any public capacity. He had been confined at Fürstenried Palace since 1883. When Ludwig II died, under those murky circumstances in June 1886, the succession passed to Otto purely as a dynastic technicality. His uncle Luitpold was immediately appointed Prince Regent, and governed Bavaria for the entirety of what was nominally Otto's reign. Otto never sat on the throne, never signed a document, never made a single royal decision, and was never seen in public during his 27 years as king. The throne was simply occupied by his name, while someone else ran the country. He was eventually formally deposed in 1913 because the legal fiction of his kingship had become administratively inconvenient. Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. Maria Eleonora married Gustav II Adolf of Sweden in 1620 and immediately made her obsessive devotion to him the defining and increasingly alarming feature of her queenship. She resented the birth of their daughter Christina in 1626, with a ferocity that shocked the Swedish court. She had wanted a son, and she made no effort to conceal her disappointment or her hostility toward the child. When Gustav II Adolf was killed at the Battle of Lutzen on November 6 of 1632, Maria Eleonora's grief became something else entirely. She refused to allow his body to be buried for over a year, keeping his heart in a golden casket that she placed beside her bed and slept near each night, and reportedly insisting that his coffin remain in her chambers as a constant presence. The Swedish Regency Council, which now had to govern in the name of 6-year-old Queen Christina, became increasingly alarmed at Maria Eleonora's behavior around the child. Accounts describe a mother who alternated between suffocating possessiveness and open hostility. The council eventually removed Christina from her mother's custody entirely. Maria Eleonora fled Sweden for Denmark in 1640, living in self-imposed exile for years before being permitted to return, spending the remainder of her life politically isolated. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.